We want to thank you so much for attending the Together SC Summit. It was our first time in person in a few years, and so we had a really great turnout. The Development Peer Network rocked it. We had about 85-ish people attending the Development Peer Network, and we had a wait list. So kudos to you guys for actually making it in. And then for those of you who were not able to attend, have no fear. We have developed a Slack channel just for the Development Peer Network. So all of those resources will be available to you. Just send me an email at heather@togethersc.org, and I will be able to provide you guys with that link. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and get started with an introduction of each of our panelists. So of course, she gets picked on first because I have the actual relationship with her. So GB Olson is the Vice President of Resource Development at United Way of the Midlands. She's been working in the development field for the last couple of decades across different spectrums. And so she has a very unique perspective when it comes to non-traditional giving, as well as major gifts. So GB, welcome. We're excited to have you.
Thank you very much. I am looking forward to chatting with everybody and hopefully learn something from you all too when you pose your questions.
Wonderful. Thanks, GB. Next, we have Michelle Hardy. Michelle serves as the Vice President for Advancement at Central Carolina Community Foundation. It is one of the largest community foundations in the state of South Carolina, and she works alongside an amazing team to provide donor-advised funds for those in our communities who are looking for great ways to get involved philanthropically. So Michelle, thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to being part of the discussion today. And we do offer a variety of different vehicles, but today I'm going to really highlight our most popular donor advised fund. So, but if people have questions of other things or other options later, you're welcome to contact me. But thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
No problem. And finally, we have the amazing Winkler Group, who has been so very lauded as a go-to for all fundraising consulting. But we are so privileged to have Raymond Carnley here from the Winkler Group. And Raymond serves as the Associate Vice President for Client Services. So we're really excited to have you here representing the Winkler Group. You guys are a fan favorite here in South Carolina. So Raymond, welcome.
Thank you, Heather. It's an honor to be a fan favorite, I'll say, and it's an honor to be with you today. I start to see a lot of familiar names and faces across the board as I look out there, folks that we've worked with and have worked for and on behalf. And so just honored to be here and look forward to your questions and to weighing in on what we see from our perspective in the development world as we really focus in on strategic planning, campaign development, and campaign management. So just glad to be a part of it. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. So you guys, I would like to start the conversation off with just a brief synopsis of what it is that you do in the realm of non-traditional giving in your workplace. Specifically, what is the thing that is not necessarily seen as your general direct mailings and campaigns and those types of things, but the things that are really breaking through and being the breakout piece of what giving looks like going forward. So GB, I'm going to start with you, and then Michelle, if you want to jump in, and then Raymond.
Sure. Well, I'll start out by saying, of course, we meet our donors wherever they're at. We try to meet them wherever they're at. So we have a multiple ways for the donor to engage with us. But if I had to pick out one area right now where we have really shifted our focus is, well, I'll start off. Most of you know what the United Way is, and for almost a century now, we have been engaged in raising funds through workplace campaigns. That's been our business model. And we've been shifting away from that some, or I should say we're flying two planes. We're flying the workplace campaign plane while we are ramping up our attractiveness to donors through other means. And that's through individual asks like you see at colleges and universities and community foundations, And we've jumped on the whole technology bandwagon because technology and social media are creating so many ways to engage in philanthropy. So the way we've done that really came up, we were pushed into it through COVID and the pandemic. And we were no longer able to go out to the workplaces that we traditionally had gone to, where it was our form of crowdfunding. We would go to a campaign and speak in front of hundreds of people at Blue Cross Blue Shield or thousands. Couldn't do that anymore. So we were like, well, how do we meet them? We created a web platform that we call the Campaign Hub, and we run our workplace giving campaigns through these hubs that we tailor to each company. And it's basically a web platform where through that web platform, we educate the donor on what the United Way is. We allow the company or entity that is running a workplace campaign on our behalf to share their how they're going to go about raising these funds. So traditionally, companies raise funds through little special events, through the dissemination of pledge forms and such. So on this platform, they're able to lay out all their campaign activities, whether it's a silent auction or they're going to have a chili cook-off, which actually does not work well with a pandemic. But now that we're coming out of it, we're seeing people promoting chili cook-offs and such on their web portal. And then we link them to our Give button, which now is an electronic way of giving rather than paper pledge forms, which we've really mostly done away with over the last decade or so. So for us, this website where we call it the Campaign Hub is really our new and most innovative way of reaching our donors at the workplace. And that was a lot. So I'll let Heather kind of maybe move on to any other type of question, whether it's for me or the other panelists.
Thanks, GB. That's awesome. Michelle, go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, GB, I used to participate and loved the campaign materials that I was in when I was at USC. So just a little background, I've been in philanthropy about 20 years. I started in a nonprofit that promoted property, and I see somebody's with the heirs property, so we may have something in common. Early in my career, I'm a recovering attorney, and then I'd worked after doing that. And I worked at Newberry College for 8 years and University of South Carolina for 8 years in different departments and areas of the university. So now I'm at the Community Foundation. And one thing I've learned about Community Foundation is when you've met one community foundation, you've met one community foundation. That they offer different vehicles and different opportunities to give through. So we don't have traditional asks in a lot of ways that I think of when I've come out of managing development and being a part of development in the higher ed space or in the independent nonprofit space. What we do is we help your donors give to you more easily. And so donor advised funds are a way that you can think of a donor advised fund as a charitable account, like a bank, if you want to. It's just a very simplified version of it. It takes like 30 minutes to set up. It's so easy. And what people do is they can then request grants to be distributed to your nonprofit, whether it's the United Way or the Center of Heirs Property. I'll tell the names. I can't see everybody's names, so I only see like to the one you represent. And we don't disseminate obviously to individuals. It's all through nonprofits. But the way it works is that individuals, families, businesses, all of those entities can start a donor advised fund. And the responsibility, the fiduciary responsibility, the legal ownership falls on the community foundation to manage them well. And it's owned. This is the part people are like, oh, the funds are owned by the community foundation. When one writes a check or sends a wire transfer or commits stock to the community foundation, it's a gift. We give a receipt, just like you give a receipt. It's a very clean, and they get that tax receipt right then. So on December 27th, or basically end of November till December 31st, if it's a weekday, we'll have people walk in that day wanting to start create a fund right that day, because it's very simple and it's very easy for the donor. So when it's easy, it's also then easy to give to the nonprofits. Yay. So they request, and we've actually converted to a portal. So we have a portal that people can request. It's super easy. It's very simplified version of an online banking. If you want to look at it, I mean, like way simple. Small children could operate it. And basically they request grants at any hours, and within 2 weeks, we check and make sure that that nonprofit's in good standing with the IRS, that it's not something illegal, because we're a 501c3, so it would jeopardize our standing as a 501c3. And then we issue the grant out within 2 weeks. And so what people love about it, what donors love about it is we take the administrative pieces out of writing the checks, keeping up with all the things. And in our portal, we have all the receipts right there. And so, and you all the gifts that you've given to, and you only get one receipt. So when someone transfers stock, it's super easy. They have one receipt that they have to turn in for the IRS. They're like, this is easy. We can set up recurring donations to nonprofits like yourselves. And so people could give once a month, and they just know. And so if people travel, or they're just wanting to simplify their lives, this is a really good option. The big thing is that it's simple to set up, and our sweet spot in this is to make philanthropy easy. So our whole mantra is to lift up philanthropy. We don't have a particular philanthropy that we are in, we all philanthropy. Okay. So as long as it's a legitimate 501c3 school, agency, religious organization, we are authorized to send out grants. I just wanted to provide that overview. It pretty much took me, even though I'm a lawyer and have been in philanthropy for over 20 years, it took me at least a year to really fully understand it. So I want you to know that there's no too simple of a question. I'm happy to answer any questions. I've got basic materials where we've kind of distilled down information to the nuggets. I'm happy to share that freely, because again, our whole purpose is to lift up philanthropy. Now, just to clarify, at the foundation, we have different departments. I mean, all 12 of us. We have different departments, but we have the finance, who are the real geniuses. They're the ones that oversee investments, make the money grow. Yay. So I don't know that I clarified that. When a donor creates a donor advised fund, a fund holder, the big thing is that it's growing their philanthropy. So for instance, if they have a fund that has $20,000 in it, they've built over time or whatnot, and a lot of these funds are not $1 million funds. There are our minimum is only $10,000. So it's a much more accessible minimum than other community foundations might have. Okay. So once they grow that, basically they get one deduction. When they put the money in, or if they make additional deductions, they get just like they would write directly to you. But if the money grows, they don't have additional tax complications, because we are a nonprofit. They just have more money to support you. See, this is why it's a win-win with the community. But I hope I gave a little overview that's straightforward, but I really welcome any questions, and also happy to answer things later as well. So I hope that's, Heather, you thumbs up? That's what you wanted? Okay, great. Perfect. Thank you.
I'd like to share something related to that, Michelle, because some people, just like they don't like endowments, a lot of people are like, oh, I don't like endowments. I want to give, and I want to help someone right away. There are also nonprofits who don't particularly like donor advised funds, right? Because they think of it similar to endowments in that they're like, oh, they're hoarding money. And that's not it. We, as fundraisers, it's incumbent on us to talk with our donors. And when we're cultivating them, if we know that they have a donor advised fund, it becomes part of that cultivation and solicitation, so that they don't sit there and it just, they took that one-time deduction and it could sit forever. It's on us to see that they spend it out, and that they, we've got to attract them to us. And it's another tool to use, knowing that, oh, they've got a donor advised fund at the community foundation. Yay. Let's use it as it's another tool in our toolbox.
GB, you brought up a really good point. So again, one community foundation is different than another community foundation, and it's also different than Some of the other vehicles that offer things at a national level, like some of the, maybe a financial institution might have a wing that does donor advised funds that don't have, when you call the community foundation, you get the local advice. So they want to know, I'll call, they'll be an anonymous, a person that wants to remain anonymous. And they'll want me to, hey, I've got $5,000 I want to grant out, but I want these type of things. And so we provide them local options in the community that we serve for that. Now they can give the donor advised fund throughout the country. And then if it's internationally, as long as there's a mailbox here in the United States. But one thing to note about us, and not every community foundation and certainly not every for-profit is this way, or nonprofit wing of a for-profit, is that we actually require them to distribute a grant every 3 years at a minimum.
Yes.
And our distribution rate is well over, like 2 years ago, we distributed more than we brought in. So we're actually, we distributed $15 million, I think last year, and it was 14 million that had come in, and it just kind of ebbs and flows because we offer a non-endowed option. So a lot of people, a lot of community foundations only offer endowed options, and they're wonderful too. It's longevity. There's a lot of good that can happen from, I love endowments because you can distribute annual gifts that are so hard to get, right? Unrestricted dollars. They're wonderful. People also like the idea of a non-endowed fund because they're nervous. Oh my goodness, it's going to be locked up in the community foundation and all the things. It's going to be stored forever. Well, if I'm a person that's a donor that might want to give to my place of worship and have this opportunity to do something amazing or to launch some program, I'm hesitant to only think I can get 4%. So what we offer is a non-endowed option where you can spend it down to zero. There's no penalty. We just close it up. So at the end, if that's what you want to do. So you do have to really, just like GB says, you have to lean in, ask questions, and just see this as a tool. But from our perspective, we actually have a policy that they must engage in grant making. So we are gentle about it. We're not like, hey, because let's be honest, life gets in the way.
Yeah.
Who thought of something? I mean, last week I was thinking of something that I thought was last year, and girl, y'all, I'm gonna tell y'all, it's like 2 years ago. So, I mean, life gets in the way, things happen, but we do have a policy that we enforce that people must, and they know that coming in. It's not like we're just springing it on them. We're very transparent about that whole process. But GB, that's an excellent point. It could be a great partnership and great tool.
Yeah, I want to, I think, just sort of maybe shift the lens a little bit, right? Because we don't manage DF, we don't go ask for that or anything like that. We really work with client partners who are looking to fundraise and looking to access maybe non-traditional forms of fundraising, whether that, then certainly that in recent years has included donor advised funds, but we've also seen emerging trends in other areas where donors are thinking about giving. I think that the reality that we would share, and we put out, I would say, if you haven't yet, go to the Winkler Group website. There's in our resource folder, there's a DAF tool that will help you think through donor advised funds. How can you think of that as a fundraising strategy? How can you identify potential donors? I think Darlene asked a question in the comments, and it's a great one. How do we know if someone has a donor advised fund? And there are a lot of different ways to answer that question. But what I would say is the thing that we're seeing, especially from a major gift fundraising, from campaign fundraising. So when we think about donors that are giving above and beyond their annual gift, donor advised funds, and particularly to Michelle's point, those that are managed by for-profit organizations that have a nonprofit wing, that's been the fastest growth in sort of charitable giving over the last 5 years over any other category. Donors with high affluence and high capacity are thinking of donor advised funds as a way of sort of holding funds that they might then distribute over a period of time, whether that be on a set schedule or at their discretion. And while I think there's a desire across the sector for some regulation in that donor advised funds, especially beyond sort of the non-profit sphere, we're not getting any anytime soon, might be the way to say that. Now, they might change that next year, but right now, I think we continue to have to sort of get our arms around this as a tool. GB said it very well, in our fundraising arsenal, right? So how do we go to work to use donor advised funds to benefit our organizations? And there's a couple different ways. One, realize that high capacity, high affluence donors are using these more and more often, and they are doing that strategically. They're thinking about, they're not just sort of setting money aside and I'll get to it when I can, but they're thinking as their donor advised fund as an extension of their philanthropy. And so how do they give that? So the more we can get our arms around that, the better we can understand it. There was a maybe an understanding amongst the sector that donor advised funds were meant for mystery and to hide and shield donors from their constituents, and that's actually not been our experience at all. Certainly, there are a handful that follow that pathway, but most of them are thinking of the tax benefits of a lump sum gift to an organization as opposed to distributing it. Michelle said it great, not having to write 40 checks, but to say, here's one check, now you go write and distribute and hold accountable and all those other types of things. And the majority of gifts that we're seeing come in, either major gifts or for campaign fundraising, they're identifying the donor, who this gift was made on behalf of. They're sharing that information. And so the first thing you should be doing is when that information is shared, make note of it right away and understand that donor is using that gift that way, or using a donor advised fund to that benefit. I think the other piece of it is begin to include it as a part of your conversation with your major donors, and to not be afraid to have that conversation of might this be something, especially if you're in campaign fundraising mode or something like that. We are having for the first time in the last few years, we've had to think about gift agreements, pledge fulfillment obligations, to where a donor is making a significant commitment to an organization and they're using a donor advised fund to fulfill that obligation. Well, you know, the donor can't obligate the organization to do that. It's in advice and all that, but you now have to bring a third party maybe into your gifting agreements. And what we did that for a client just a few weeks ago, where they were making the lead gift in a campaign through a donor advised fund, and that pledge fulfillment not only had the donor signature and the organization signature, it now had the managing agency for the donor advised fund. They were saying, yes, we will fulfill and honor this donor's commitment through that. That's especially true needed from a finance standpoint when you're thinking about accounts receivable for the organization. If you're needing to borrow against expected pledges, to build new construction, to operate and stand up programs as those pledges are fulfilled. And so the piece that we're kind of seeing through is it's not going away, might be the way to think about it. And in fact, we think for our largest donors, it will become almost the standard that they will think through. We have seen for the first time in a long time a decrease in the number of sort of private family foundations, while we are seeing an increase in the number of donor advised funds. Donors are seeing this as an easier way to do sort of family giving, family foundation management, and things like that. So that's sort of what we're seeing from that end as it relates to donor advised funds. Now, another one, and I'll throw this wild card out here, it'll get everybody's head spinning. We're seeing donors wanting to give cryptocurrency, giving other forms of non-traditional security. So not stock, but other forms of things like that. And we're having to sort of get our arms around that. It's an asset. It's an asset with real value. It's extremely volatile. It's you can be a millionaire one day and broke the next. It really is sort of that. But we are beginning to see these non-traditional forms of giving, and again, forms that are. While we would hope for some measure of regulation around that type of asset, we're just not seeing it yet. And so as a result of that, we have to be prepared to think through where a donor says, well, I can give you $10,000, but I could give you $100,000 if you would accept crypto. Well, are you prepared to have that conversation to assess and assume that risk and to move forward? So that's what we're seeing from a major gift campaign side of the aisle there, really more just in how do you then engage and go after these types of gifts.
Well, and just to address some of the questions I see, I mean, I'm not reading them very carefully because I'm trying to pay attention here, so I can't do two things at once very well. I'm limited. We publish our fund holders we have very few that want to be anonymous, and they'll pick a name that means something important to them. So our publications, quarterly publications, we're very transparent. We use Vanguard. We share openly our Vanguard quarterly statements to see how things are invested. Like, we want there to be trust. We're a community foundation built to lift up the counties here in the Midlands. And so though one can give outside of the Midlands here in the difference is the money that the foundation, people have left to the foundation itself for the purpose of competitive grants in the community, that is limited to the 11 counties in the Midlands for which we were created. So, yeah.
Awesome. So one of the questions that I had that I would like to pose to the group is, are you guys seeing, and we've talked a little bit about like the donor advice, well, we've kind of really had a lot of great conversations surrounding donor advised funds, third parties being involved in the philanthropy process and things of that nature. And I know, just from my work with United Ways, that GB, you have experience with that and that third party. But it seems like folks are leaning more towards going to these third parties, assisting with their philanthropic interests. So, and even outside of the local third parties, right? Because we're looking at donor advised funds from community foundations, and that's like your local foundation that is really tapped into what the local nonprofits are doing. So when we're thinking about these third parties and how they're getting engaged, I want to know from your perspective, what trends are you guys seeing that are going to possibly alter the way that donors give within the next 3 to 5 years?
I think
That's a great question. Yeah. Well, let me sort of start, because I think we see that from a major gift lens, from a campaign fundraising more than anything. I think in some ways we've already touched on it a little bit, right? So an increase in sort of looking at donor advised funds as a vehicle for giving, and what that's a trend that I don't see going away. And I don't know, other than it introducing a new party to the conversation or a third party to the decision process, I don't know that changes that landscape when donors think about their giving. What was a family foundation is now a donor advised fund. I really do think that's sort of the trend that's going. I think the piece that will be interesting to see from a trend standpoint, though, is that particularly in the for-profit sector that have nonprofit wings, you've got a lot of donor advised funds that are not single entity contributors, where you might have 50 or 100 or any number of people contributing to sort of a community or a group donor advised fund. And so the piece around that is that that's currently not regulated, right? They can hold that money, they can spend that money, they can do as it's in the financial manager's best interest maybe to hold the money and not spend it, because they get to charge you for it, stuff like that. But we do think, and one of the trends we are seeing is hopefully some regulation around how they are to spend those funds and make those. And so what I think you'll see is in the next few years, hopefully, maybe it's wishful thinking, but I do think, given the public discourse around that, there are millions, hundreds of millions of dollars being held in these funds that are currently unregulated. And as regulation comes around that, I think you will all of a sudden begin to see these large sort of corporate funders play a big role in philanthropy, because they'll have funds that need to be distributed, need to be funded, whether that's to the tune of a community foundation, but acting maybe on a larger level, a more regional level, or in individual sectors. I think that's something that will, if not yet happening, will begin to happen. The other piece, and I alluded to, I sort of shared it with you, is I think that as we assess and think about wealth and how wealth is being accumulated and how it's being managed, again, the number of major gifts being made using non-traditional currencies like cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Dogecoin, all those, is something that there are a lot of organizations eager and ready to run to that as a means to give. If that's the case, we suggest you treat it as a security. You sell it, trade it, immediately cash out and get the money. We don't ever advise you hold on to stock. We don't ever advise that you hold on to securities and things like that. But there are a lot of organizations that have been very hesitant and very reticent to take those types of gifts because of the perceived volatility around that. And I'm of the idea that short of crypto going away, it's a trend that will continue to emerge. There will be more pressure from donors to consider that as a way to make significant gifts for an organization. So working with a good, a trusted partner in that realm is something that's needed, and I think the proliferation of that across the sector is something that's needed right now. It's an area where a lot of folks don't have answers other than donors wanting to see that happen.
I see a question in there, and United Way is a recipient of many gifts from the donor advised funds at the community foundations. I can speak from how we how we choose to recognize the donor. And so of course, as Michelle had said, when the donor makes the gift, the charitable deduction occurs at the time that they made the gift. That's already been taken care of. So our stewardship, we don't have to do the tax side of things. It's a thank you for making your gift through the community, through your donor advised fund at the community foundation. But that stewardship remains just as important as if you had that, you had to add the tax language on it, because if you don't acknowledge them, they're not going to give through their donor advised fund or any way if you do not do that. But the credit, as far as does go to the organization, it goes to the donor advised funds. We have Central Carolina Community Foundation, as far as from an accounting purpose, they're actually the donor, and the soft credit goes to the donor as you're thinking of it, the person who requested that gift be made to us. But they get no tax receipt for it.
Right. That was well said. Thank you, GB. I wanted to clarify just a couple of points to Raymond's point about Family Foundation versus DAF. One reason I think that the donor advised funds are becoming more popular is a lot more affordable. And, right here, you can start one at $10,000, which sounds a heck of a lot better than hiring a lawyer, accountant, and everybody else to do it. And a lot of people, the things that I've researched, and I've never created a family foundation, but it looks like you need about $5 million in it to make it worth doing, to cover, because you got a lot more reporting obligations. The other thing is that when you own a family foundation, or when you're part of a family foundation, you start one, you have to submit openly in your 990 all who you give to. So there's no anonymity. They can say, well, you gave to so-and-so, but you didn't give to me. And I see you gave to so-and-so, but not me. Well, through the donor advised fund, you're part of all of the funds. And we have over 500 funds at the foundation. And so we do publish all that we're given, but they don't know if it comes from this particular person. So people feel a little bit like, okay, I can give. Again, it's back to that, making that philanthropy a good experience for somebody. Sometimes somebody wants to give to everybody, but they only have so much money. And so some days it's your year and some days it's not your year. And we know that, right? With our own funding, with our own giving. I'd love to give to everybody a lot of money, but I only have so much in my checking account. So sometimes you have to make choices. The second thing is, one of the issues I see with the national, the complaints on the national level with some of the nonprofits that are affiliated with corporate for-profit situations on the donor advised fund managers, is the issue of planned giving. So what happens when the distribution at the person's death? Is it clear, or is it just going to stay in that fund and do what? So to Raymond's point, there needs to be some clarification on that. And there could be very good policies in place. I don't know. I don't work for one of them. But at the Community Foundation, we do our very, very best to have what we call a distribution page, and people can say, this is where I want it to go. So oftentimes what somebody does is creates a donor advised fund, and during their lifetime, they're enjoying distributing philanthropy here and there, and they're understanding the process. And they're like, okay, but when I pass, what's left? What goes on in this? What's going to happen with the rest? Well, we can do an assortment of things. Typically, people like to endow it in some way and either have a designated fund, so then it supports their favorite 2 charities into perpetuity, and annually we distribute a check out of the annual spending allocation, which has been 4% for a little while, but it's decided annually by our board. Or they may say, well, we would like to distribute it out in over 5 years to such and such organization, or these 3. Or they want to create a field of interest fund, which is a great option for people that are like, what do I give to if I don't know if my organization is still going to be there? Well, what we do is, and a lot of people create field of interest funds from the get-go. It's basically, it's a fund that the community foundation will then administer and receive competitive grant applications for. And annually, we give out those annual spendable allocations through a competitive grant process, and it's distributed. We don't hold it. We're just stewards of it. But it might be if you support K through 12 education or health in elderly or whatever it is, your field, your area of interest. And the great thing is it helps with the unpredictable. Like, well, what if there's a great new nonprofit that started 5 years from now? We don't know that. No one could predict the flood here in Columbia in 2015. Nobody certainly could predict the pandemic, or there might have been people saying I could, but I didn't see anybody, doing their storage kit or anything. My whole point is that it helps. There's different options, and we're very vocal about trying to incorporate ways to be a partner. And I would recommend this for all nonprofits, because one of my passions is planned giving. I don't know, it shouldn't be considered non-traditional, but I feel like it is non-traditional. Let's just be honest. We're always looking for that next year in the traditional sense. But to be honest, the longevity of an organization is to have those planned gifts. And there's a couple guarantees. Eventually you're going to pay taxes, and eventually you're going to die. And so whether you want to talk about it or not, it's something that's in a reality of all of ours. And it can be a very peace-giving process. And when I work with people, I would talk about planned giving, I have a great sense of enthusiasm for the subject, because I know what joy it brings to people to have peace with their assets and what it can do after they pass. So it really is a gift for that donor. And it's also a good stewardship, at least on behalf of the community foundation, to make sure we know, because I tell people, you decide. You don't want to leave it up to me. I don't want to decide. You tell me. And so it's hard, though, for people, in defense of people not setting these things up. It's not something we just, excitedly talk about. But I do tell people, it's like, look, you need to think about where you feel super comfortable, and let's at least put something in the circle super comfortable to ward off the inevitable, just in case. And then you can always adjust it. So in the community foundation sense, we allow people to change their dispositions of where they wanted to go later in life. So if later in life, the hospice has done some wonderful work, nonprofit hospice, to one of their friends, and they decided that's where I want my money to go, well, we can make that adjustment, okay? But I think it's dangerous when people don't talk to their donors, if they have these kind of funds, about what to do with it at the end of their life, because then you bump up against what Raymond was talking about, where it just sits there, and that can be a hoarding situation, whether it's intentional or not. So we're very vigilant on trying to get that out. But I think these conversations are hard, but I think they're very peace-giving, and I think they're kind to the donors.
So for us, for the last almost 10 years now, we've been focusing a lot on engagement networks. We call them affinity groups, and we've got a young leader society. We have a women in philanthropy. We have a retiree group. And I'm going to focus a little bit on the retiree group. It's not, they've been very traditional givers. They're most of them are boomers, a few Gen Xers in there, and they've been giving to the United Way for decades. And so, they've shown their love for us, but sometimes their income has changed. Their income stream has definitely changed. So we've really been talking to that group of folks a lot about giving from their 401ks, giving a qualified charitable distribution. So when a person turns 70 and a half, they have to take their required minimum distribution from their IRA. And for those that maybe don't have cash flow issues, it is much smarter for them to give from that required minimum distribution than to give from their cash assets that they have, because we as a charity don't have to pay tax on that. But when they take their required minimum distribution, they have to pay tax on it. So if they are going to be charitable to begin with, we encourage them to, send us something from their a QCD, or qualified charitable distribution, and that way they're not paying tax on it. And they've also met that not need, but desire of theirs to make their annual gift to us, because that's a habit that they formed a long time ago. And they continue to do it, but a lot of them, they weren't even aware, they hadn't even thought about that. They're still writing that $1,000 check or $2,500. And when we've educated them to say, hey, you can actually do that out of your minimum distribution, then instead of taking it out, they save a little bit on their taxes on that. Now, of course, the wealthier you are and the larger gift you make, that's better. But we at the United Way, we tend to be dealing a lot with the average philanthropist, the person like you and I on here that, we're not making $1 million gifts. We're making $1,000, $2,500, and so on. But every drop in that bucket, that's what we're about here at the United Way. And you could be a philanthropist at any level. So it's not non-traditional, but we're using the conversation with our retirees that, please take a look at giving that way rather than from your liquid assets that you have.
Oh, that's a really good point, GB. And I would encourage people to have that conversation in January, because I'm going to tell you, I have seen a lot of people think about it in October and November, and it takes a little bit longer to get that distribution cut, and they don't make it by the end of the year. Right. It's a sad day. And they can do it right there in January and be already, and again, have that peace. Because we're trying to help our donors personally, as we are trying to help the nonprofits be lifted up, right? So we can help them by being kind and say, look, you can actually do this in January. It's a win for everybody. And GB, wouldn't you rather you be just as excited to get it in January than you would be sweating out in December, right?
I really want it in January. Let's spread it out, spread the workload out a little bit. Yeah.
So,
go ahead.
I had a quick question, and I'd like to also open up the floor for any questions that our attendees may have. But what pushback, if any, have you guys received while you're promoting non-traditional giving opportunities? Because we all know, I mean, I feel like we can be candid. It's a safe space. In the South, sometimes we're a little reluctant to change when it comes to certain things, specifically when we're talking about our funds. But then also when you're thinking about planned giving, when you're thinking about like stock, like donating stock, like everybody's really hushed because, of course, especially when you're talking about planned giving, nobody wants to talk about death. It's so taboo, but you have to plan in advance. But while you guys are out there, campaigning and doing all the things that you're doing, what pushback have you guys received from just people who you've approached?
Yeah. So I'll share just a couple. So one, I've already shared sort of the aversion to crypto as a form of giving, and I think that's just because it's new and people are uncertain about it. They think that because it's new, it's bad. Or there's too much risk and things like that. Where we have seen those embrace it and do it well, it's been a new way of really growing a donor's philanthropy for the organization. And that comes down to just educating your decision makers of how those gifts work and the impact that they could have and will have on an organization. I think the pushback on planned giving, and so I was so when I was in the frontline fundraiser, I specialized in major and planned gifts, and I can tell you the biggest pushback to planned giving is in the sector. It's our own. We get in our own way. We get in our own head. I'm just going to go ahead and say it straight up, and so we can all get our arm around it. Having done this for many years in the South, folks are open to the conversation. I think Michelle makes a great point when she's saying that it's a way of embracing a donor and thinking about that legacy piece. Now you've got to do it the right way, right? So your best planned giving prospects are from your most engaged donors. If you're just building a relationship with a brand new donor, planned giving is not a conversation to have right now. It's not. They are from those. Your best prospects for planned giving are from those that are already engaged. They're bought in. They know your mission. They've made a gift. If they have an endowment in place that benefits the organization, either through a donor advised fund or or something else like that, then they're an excellent plan giving because they understand the perpetuity of giving and the longevity of endowment and the impact that their plan gifts can have. And for many donors that have had that long history of service and support for an organization, this will be the way that they make their largest gift to an organization. It's the way of doing that. Like anything in development, it's relational, right? We won't get plan gifts because we send a letter out, and we won't get plan gifts because we put it on social media, or we might get one or two through the door, but we're going to get plan gifts by thinking about who is the person that goes with me to influence this gift more than anyone else. And if it's a plan gift, somebody that's made that plan gift, right? That has said, I want to talk to you about that. Publishing your legacy society in the back of your annual report is not going to get you any plan gifts. It's just going to recognize those that have done that. We have, I think, built in our mind the sense of it's taboo to talk about death, and we're not talking about how you're going to die or even when you're going to die. We're talking about the legacy of your life and your life's giving to an organization that lives beyond us, right? And that changes the position of the conversation. I always jokingly said, and there's a reason for this, but when they say, well, I'm not dying anytime soon. And I was like, of course you're not. And if you want to live to be 105, you should make a plan gift because they all live to be 105. And there's a correlation to affluence and the quality of life and things. Those that can leave a plan gift usually have better access to healthcare, things like that. I don't want this to be a divulsion into that, but it really is in the sense of just saying, we hope that your giving, your life, your support, your connection to the organization lasts for a very, very long time. We'd like to talk about how that legacy of service continues after you're gone. And opening that door, now the piece that we would also say is the timeline to cultivate, solicit, and put in place a plan gift is significantly longer than that of a major gift or a campaign gift. So if a new major donor takes 12 to 18 months to sort of cultivate a relationship such that they became a major donor or a campaign donor, we see the lead time for plan gifts to be 36 to 48 months. And that's when you begin the conversation with a donor that you already know very, very well, right? Because there are so many different vehicles for plan gifts. There are different ways of thinking, whether it's a charitable remainder trust, gift annuity, lead trust, pooled income. There are so many different vehicles available. And the piece about that is you as the fundraiser are never the person to finalize that process. You are to make the ask and introduce the idea, but they need to bring in a certified financial planner, a person that can put those instruments in place. That's where a community foundation is a great partner, to have somebody that can actually be a trustee on behalf of an organization for a planned gift or something like that. And so the piece, now, simple codicils to a will, I bequeath $100,000 to, that doesn't require a whole lot of legalese. But when you start thinking about remainder trust, gift annuities and things like that, you've got to bring other trusted advisors into the conversation. And so I think, truthfully, we use the taboo excuse as a convenient way of not doing the hard work of plan giving. It takes time, it takes effort, and maybe we need to help our executive directors, our bosses, our boards understand the time it takes to cultivate and solicit those types of gifts. I think often in a world where we need money now, we don't value the impact of plan giving, despite the fact that it accounts for the overwhelming majority of major gifts made on an annual basis. And so I think we've got to do some education within our sector and coaching up, if you will, to our leaders and to our boards to see the value of putting those types of resources in place.
That's super great insight from both of y'all. I'm like writing my notes myself. I have three little perspective points on this. So I think a lot of times when I'm talking with people, they feel everyone has a huge difference in an idea of what's a big gift, right? So some person stroking a check for 100 is outside of where they're thinking they're ever going to be. And then but I try to tell people, I'm going to tell you something right now, $5,000 is a lot of money when it's cash and you need it. And that could be for any organization. Think about $5,000, not 100 or $5 million would have made a difference during a tough month in COVID. So just perspective. So I think talking to people and helping them understand that, yes, 1% or 2% of one of your retirement instruments, like an IRA or whatever, could be a good choice. It doesn't have to be the whole kit and caboodle. We're not going to talk to you. So one thing about that too is looking at definitely partnering and trying to build relationships with different professional advisors. So that's one of the things that we work really hard with at the foundation. I never want to be seen as the primary advisor for anyone. I want to be a supporter, an extra staff or team member, because I will tell you this, we do not serve as trustee at the community foundation for any kind of that's usually a bank. A lot of people won't take that awesome job, but it's just a lot of work. We don't have staff. But one thing we do offer, and I want to throw it out there, and it is non-traditional in a one way, and I don't have time to go deep into it. So if you want to know more, you can come back to me, is we offer nonprofits partnerships to develop agency funds. What is an agency fund? It's a fund that is held and owned, the assets at the foundation, but that can be only granted back to that nonprofit. I'm gonna say that again. It's a fund that we have that we create between the nonprofit and the community foundation. The foundation owns the funds legally, and the only funds can only go back to that nonprofit. Why are these helpful? One, you can have a non-endowed one where people, like a lot of times religious organizations will have when they're trying to, or people that are trying to build campaigns, and they're trying to have an invested fund that someone else manages because that's a lot of responsibility for their team, a lot of fiduciary responsibility. Their board's also like, yikes, that's a lot of responsibility here. You know, I do this for a living, I don't do that. So it brings some comfort, but a lot of times people do a endowed agency fund. And I'll tell you the advantage of this. It is an attractor to certain donors because it is managed by a professional community foundation. We pool our funds. So we have over $175 million worth of funds pooled together. 155 million are invested right now with Vanguard. And as such, we also invest the community foundation's money, like the ones that we use to give out competitive grants people have left to the community foundation for that purpose, in that same pool. There's a lot of skin in the game. We have a fiduciary responsibility. And so when you are promoting leaving something in the will, it does give some donors, not all, but some donors, a sense of peace that this outside accredited community foundation that's been here decades and will be here decades, it bears that responsibility. So to some people, it feels like, especially those nonprofits that are smaller to mid-sized, we certainly do have larger that partner with us in that way. And people, the most common questions I have are, well, what happens if, we need it? Well, if it's a non-endowed, you can request all the funds back to the organization down to zero. There's no penalty, okay? If it's an endowment, you can request up to the spendable allocation for that year, which has been at 4%. It's voted on by our board. It hasn't changed in a while. I can't guarantee it's going to be that exact number, but in that ballpark, most likely. Or you can say, well, we're trying to still grow this corpus. But people have different purposes. Some of the purposes people use them for is if they have an endowed fund, they want to get big enough where they can endow the executive director position. They don't want to worry about that again, because let's face facts. I used to also write grants, and the hardest money to get is that operational money. But you know what? A lot of organizations got to operate. I don't know one that doesn't have to operate. And so the executive director in my book, super critical, key and critical to that organization. And so, but you can write a grant for programmatic dollars all day long. And you can seek from certain donors, I don't want to give to that administration. Well, okay. But this one, people build endowments to do things like this, building maintenance, different things like that, that it's really hard to get those dollars. I just throw that out there.
All right. Well, I think we have time for maybe one question, maybe one or two. Is there a question, a burning question that was not answered through the chat or just as we went along today? Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for bringing a wealth of knowledge to our discussion today. The Development Peer Network is still fairly new, so we're really looking at intentional conversations surrounding things that are necessary for our day-to-day operations as development professionals. And we actually asked at the beginning of this fiscal year, when we kicked everything off, what some of those burning issues have been as we work towards creating a better development network. And one of the key things that was mentioned was non-traditional giving and how to go about navigating that space. So thank you guys so much for being able to be a part of this conversation, for providing so much insight. We really appreciate you. So to our attendees and even to our presenters, if you feel so inclined, number one, if you aren't already a part of the Development Peer Network, please sign up. If your nonprofit is a part of the Together SC family, you are already in there. You just need to go and register and select Development Peer Network. I'm biased, but it is probably the best of the peer networks. I'm just saying. So make sure that you guys sign up, and big kudos to our Development Peer Network Advisory team. Thank you guys so much for joining. And finally, one thing that I do want to ask you guys to do is to save the date. Well, you'll get the dates when they come. But our next opportunity for us all to engage will hopefully be in person. That's right. We're not doing a big summit or anything like that. We're going to table that for right now. But each of the AFPs in the upstate, low country, and Midlands area are partnering with the Development Peer Network for our Better Together Mixer. So next month, to round off the end of an amazing fiscal year, we are partnering with these local AFPs in your local communities for a mixer for a couple of hours after work. And you can stay tuned to those details. They will be coming via email from both AFP and from Together SC. So thank y'all so much for everything that you've contributed to this conversation. And we hope that you have a wonderful and amazing week. Everyone, take care and have a great day.